So it's pretty fair to say that over the past few months I've been somewhat critical of the PlayStation Portal, what with it being a Wi-Fi only device, requiring a PlayStation 5 to function at all, and not playing games locally. But I figured if I'm going to critique Sony and what they think is the best solution in their ecosystem for a portable gaming experience, I should put my money where my mouth is. And no, I didn't buy a PlayStation Portal. I spent the same kind of money, in fact less, than what it costs to get into Sony's portable gaming ecosystem. And I went and bought an ROG Ally. And I bought an open box, which is why it was less than Sony's portable gaming ecosystem. And I want to talk about it today. So let's dive in. But now I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, wait a minute, the PlayStation Portal is $200 and the ROG Ally is $700. Those are nowhere close to the same prices. Why are you saying it's a price equivalent? Well, because, like I said, the PlayStation Portal doesn't play games locally. It's a $200 accessory to a $500 console. So when you add that together, that's $700. The same price as an ROG Ally. And because I went open box, I actually saved quite a bit of money. But that did come with some caveats. But what doesn't come with caveats and saves you money is today's video partner, Mint Mobile. I've personally been using Mint Mobile on my work phone that I use here for my YouTube channel, and it has been fantastic. You get all the same features that you would from any of the bigger carriers, like speed, data, 5G access, as well as unlimited talk and text and a mobile hotspot, and it all starts for as low as $15 a month. It's super easy to set up because you can just download an eSIM if your phone supports it, and in the case that your phone doesn't support an eSIM, you can have Mint Mobile send you a physical SIM card free of charge. And you can start a brand new number like I did, or if you don't want to start a new number and you want to carry your other one over from your previous carrier, you can do that too, and Mint Mobile makes it super easy. They also have the nation's largest 5G network, and I can actually attest to that because the only time I haven't had 5G using this phone is when I went to a coffee shop that used a bank vault as a room for one of their coffee tables, which I don't think most people are going to be experiencing on a regular basis. From my personal experience, Mint Mobile has been fantastic, and from now till January 1st, if you use my link in the description, trymintmobile.com/GarrettCrespo, you can get 3 months for free when you sign up with 3 months for Mint Mobile. Again, that link is trymintmobile.com/GarrettCrespo down in the link in the description. Go ahead and check it out after the video. Huge thanks to Mint Mobile for partnering with me, and now on to the rest of the video. So just for a little bit of context, when I buy things open box, I go for a 3 strikes you're out rule, because if something has 3 different problems with 3 different products and they all got returned at some point, it's probably an issue with the product as a whole and it's not a product you should buy. But I do the 3 strikes you're out because there's also the chance that it's just a one-off fluke. For example, when I got my Google Pixel 6 Pro, the first one I got my hands on had a big old crack on the internal lens. I got this new one and there have been no problems. This product, the ROG Ally, used 2 of the 3 strikes that I would have given it, and I finally got one on the 3rd try that has been perfect. But the first 2 weren't, and it actually kind of stems to things that were known problems that I only discovered after dealing with these from an open box experience. The first one I got my hands on had a dead SD card reader, and that's actually a known problem with these devices. They have somewhat fixed it in the firmware, and from everything I can tell, it seems like their fix is to just never turn off the fan on the left side, so there's constant airflow going over the SD card reader, and to aggressively ramp the fan up when you start playing games. It seems to work so far because I haven't had any issues with this current one and its SD card reader, but it was definitely not a smart idea to put something as sensitive as an SD card reader right underneath a cooling vent. But I took that one in, got it replaced, and when I got the next one home, the B button was mashed in. And when I say mashed in, it was like mashed and would not come out, and I couldn't get it to pop out. It was broken, just broken. And I realized that I remember when I used to work at Best Buy selling Asus products, ROG specifically, and just feeling like the build quality wasn't quite there. And don't get me wrong, the build quality on this is pretty decent, but there are a few things that just feel cheaper than you'd expect. And unfortunately, that button kind of did. So that was strike 2. Then I finally get this one, and I've had no problems since. There's no wood around here for me to knock on, but I'll just say, knock on wood. And actually, interestingly enough, I don't know if this is a revision thing or not, but the buttons do feel somewhat different than the one that I was running into issues with where the button got mashed in. I don't know if they've updated the buttons or the mechanism underneath, but it seems to be fine now. And also the SD card reader works just fine now. I've had no issues with it, and I put a 512 gig SD card in there. It's worked great. My recommendation if you're gonna go with something like this open box is to try and find one that is a little bit newer, and also try and make sure that you can open the box up and physically take a look at it, because while that may not give you an idea of if the SD card reader is having a problem, it will at least let you see if there are any button issues or if something's broken on it. But if you can find one that maybe got returned because somebody ordered it and then decided they didn't want it and hardly used it at all, you can get yourself some pretty good deals. Like the one I got, for example, was in excellent condition, barely used at all, and I spent $500 to get it instead of the listed MSRP of $700. But again, when it comes to open box, just make sure that you can physically examine it to make sure there's nothing physically wrong with it. But whether you're buying new or you're buying open box, what are you actually getting in the box? Well, you're getting a Ryzen Z1 Extreme, which is at the moment the fastest handheld gaming APU you can buy, and this is in both the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go, both of which are the fastest portable gaming devices that you can buy. You're also getting 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 memory at 6,400 megatransfers per minute, and that's important because since this is an APU as opposed to a dedicated processor and graphics chip, the memory is shared between the system and the graphics. So the faster, the better. And trust me, you want to make sure that you have the memory settings on either auto or as high as they'll go. We'll talk a little bit more about the software you use to do that in a minute. In terms of storage, like I mentioned, you have an SD card reader that hopefully will work, and you also get 512 gigabytes on an SSD inside that is serviceable. So you bet your ass the first thing I did was I took the 512 gig SSD out and I threw a terabyte in there. And it was surprisingly easy, and getting the software to load back in like factory was pretty easy. And actually, just a little side note here, while I was restoring this through the Asus Restore tool, I realized that this is technically the first OEM or pre-built computer that I've ever owned. I have only ever built my own Windows PCs, and this is the first one where I guess you could technically consider it a pre-build, because, well, I obviously can't build this myself. But just a fun little fact, I've only ever built my own PCs or bought a Mac, so I guess there's a first time for everything. Anyway, on top of the device, you have a headphone jack for plugging in pretty much any headphones. It's got modern Bluetooth and Wi-Fi 6E, so you can connect up some headphones and you can get an extremely reliable Wi-Fi connection. And considering I have a Wi-Fi 6E network, it's been pretty fast. Like, transfers and downloads have been not quite wired speed, but surprisingly close. Also on the top of the device is a USB 3.2 Gen 2 port, which can be used for charging, data transfer. You can also plug it into the multitude of docks that are available on Amazon and use it like a Windows PC or a Nintendo Switch on steroids, but you'll notice that the port is bigger than USB 3.2 Gen 2 because you have the USB-C port, then something next to it. That port is the proprietary connection for the XG Mobile Hub. This is basically a graphics card and a hub all packed into one, and it lets you turn this into like a full-blown desktop. It's kind of weird, and it also costs significantly more than the ROG Ally, so, you know, if you want to make this your all-in-one device, I guess technically you can for the price of a full-blown desktop, but I just kind of find it weird. But it's there if you want to. Around the front is a 7-inch display at 1080p. It's not 8 inches like the PlayStation Portal, and I know for some PlayStation Portal fans that extra inch makes all the difference, but you do have a 120 hertz refresh rate, so that's pretty nice. It does only go to a peak brightness of 500 nits, which for indoor gaming is fine, or if you're playing outside and you're in the shade, that's also fine, but it's not going to be ideal for direct sunlight. So definitely make sure that you have some sort of covering over you to make sure you can see the display clearly. But the anti-reflective coating is pretty nice. It keeps a lot of glare away from the display and keeps the image nice and clear. The screen also supports FreeSync, which when we go to talk about how this performs in-game will become kind of important. Flanking the display are the controls, and it's pretty much just a traditional Xbox controller layout, which is my preferred way of playing. I like when the thumbstick is actually over the D-pad. It's just a little more comfortable for me. And of course the joysticks have RGB around them for anybody who cares. And this thing also has 2 programmable buttons around the back. I don't use that too often on any controllers, but if you do, that's an option for you. You do have 2 extra buttons though below your pause and select options, which is your ROG Ally Armory Crate button, which takes you to your Armory Crate. This gives you access to all your games as well as settings, and when I mentioned earlier about changing the video memory options, this is where you do that as well. And then the button on the left is for quick settings, where you can adjust the brightness of the screen, the volume of the device, even though you have buttons that you can do that with on the top. And you also have a couple quick settings like the frame rate of the device, the brightness of the RGB, and these are all customizable. Overall, the physical presentation of the device is pretty solid, and it's also not a very heavy device, so when it comes to holding it for a long period of time, it's really good. I can sit there and play it, and the nice thing too is that the parts that are actually making contact with your hands don't get warm, or at least don't get very warm, and that's because of the cooling system that ROG put into this device. Don't worry, we'll talk about the gaming performance here shortly, but when you are in game, the fans in this device can be either pretty loud or almost inaudible, which is surprising because having used the Steam Deck, the fans were pretty noticeable. But with this one, you can either have silent, which is a 10-watt option, 15 watts, which is the performance option, or turbo, and that actually has two different wattage options, 25 on battery and 30 when you're connected to power. And on the first two, your performance and your silent mode, those both have the fans running pretty quietly. And once you turn it up to 30 or 25, the fans do get loud, but surprisingly not loud enough to overwhelm the speakers that come built into this thing. Now, when it comes to the cooling itself, it's far enough away from your hands that you don't feel it, and the only way you can actually feel the heat coming off this thing is to put your hands over the vents at the top. But that's really not something you would do on a regular basis. And like I said, even at full blast, these fans are not loud enough to overwhelm the speakers that are built into this. And ignoring the marketing that Asus put all over the speakers, these are just really good speakers. I will say they're probably not something you want to use when you're out in public, so that headphone jack will be kind of important, but if you're just sitting at home playing, or you're in an area where playing through the speakers doesn't really matter, they're really good. Like, here, have a listen. Yeah, these speakers definitely put portable gaming devices like the Switch to shame, though there is a lot more real estate in this to put speakers in than there is on the Switch, but they're good speakers nonetheless. All right, I know y'all been waiting for this. Let's talk about how this thing actually performs, because like I said earlier, this chip in both the ROG Ally, which I have, and the Lenovo Legion Go is the best mobile gaming chip you can buy right now. So how does it perform when it comes to games? Well, for me personally, there are three different categories that I would break the gaming experience into, that being indie games, old games, and AAA titles. And the reason why I do this is because it really helps you kind of understand what you can expect from each of these. For example, with indie games, you play something like Cult of the Lamb or any 2D indie game. It's going to perform fantastically. You've got games like Little Inferno that just fly on something like this, which is to be expected because they're not very demanding games. So that 120 Hz display is running full speed, no dips, dead silent, great battery life. That's just what you can expect from most indie games. Now, when it comes to the category of older games, because I'm old, I've watched these games become easier and easier to play as the years have gone on. A perfect example of this is the Master Chief Collection or Fallout New Vegas. These games were impressive when they first came out, but have slowly become easier and easier to run. So when I play games off the Master Chief Collection like Halo 3, I can run that with the enhanced graphics options. I can still run the device in performance mode and get 3.5 to 4 hours of battery life and be playing it at 120 Hz with no issues and no fan noise. And games like Fallout 3 and New Vegas are exactly the same way. Play with the settings maxed out, and you get 120 FPS while running at 15 watts. In fact, the only game that's an older AAA title where I had to run it at the higher 25 watt setting to get 120 FPS was Skyrim. But it's also the remastered one, so maybe that's why it required it. But aside from that, pretty much most of the older games that I used to play as a kid can be run on this at 120 FPS and get great battery life and no fan noise. Also, on a side note, I was installing older games like this on the SD card instead of the built-in SSD, and this is because I know the SD card is much slower than the internal SSD, but these games, when they originally came out, were expecting hard drives on PCs or even worse hard drives in the PlayStation 3 or the Xbox 360. So running them on an SD card is still much faster than what they would have been anticipating back when they first came out. So if you want to play older games on this and you want to save some space on the internal SSD, an SD card reader works just fine for these, as long as the SD card reader still works. But now for the last category, the new games, the AAA titles, this is where it's surprising what this can do, but you have to be realistic with your expectations. For example, I can play Halo Infinite just fine on this when you set most of the settings to medium and when you run it at the Steam Deck's resolution of 800p as opposed to the full resolution of 1080p. And even then, you're going to be getting 60 FPS as opposed to the maximum 120 FPS. And that's fine for a handheld console experience, just keep your expectations realistic. This is also where the display supporting FreeSync, like I mentioned earlier, can be kind of important, because when things get kind of busy in the game, you can watch as the FPS dips a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it's really stuttering because of the FreeSync support. And you also get AMD's upscaler, which really helps make it look decent on a display like this, even though you're not running at the full resolution. I mean, hell, with upscaling turned on and the settings dialed back to medium at the Steam Deck's resolution of 800p, I was able to run Cyberpunk on this thing, which is nothing short of impressive. And it actually looked about as good, or in my opinion, a little bit better than what the console version of Cyberpunk looked like when I bought it for the Xbox One. And yeah, I know comparing it to the console version isn't a very high bar to clear, but it's still impressive nonetheless that I can take a game like Cyberpunk 2077 on the go with me. That's just wild. I also tried out the latest Forza Motorsports, which is a brand new AAA game, and again, with medium to low settings, it was able to handle it just fine. But there is something you have to keep in mind with all the games I just mentioned. Actually, two things. The first one is that you are not ever running these things at 10 or 15 watts on this Z1 Extreme chip. You are running them at 25 all the time. And the second thing is that by doing that, you are dramatically reducing the battery life. So you're running it at 25 watts, so the fans are up, but like I said, the speakers kind of overcome that fan noise. But what you're not overcoming is the fact that you're going from 2, 3, 4 hours on the older games and indie titles to 1 hour, maybe, on some games. Heck, I got 45 minutes with Forza Motorsports on the battery. That is how quickly this thing can eat through batteries. So if you're going to be playing modern AAA titles, I would say it's fine if you're just looking to kill some time quickly with those, but try and make sure if you're going to do a long gaming session on the go that you're somewhere near a power outlet. So like I said at the start of this video, my goal here was to put my money where my mouth was and get something that I believe is where handheld gaming should go. And in my experience with the ROG Ally, this is where handheld gaming should go, whether it be this particular model or an open box version of it, or even the Lenovo Legion Go, which uses the same chip but has detachable controllers. This is what handheld gaming should be. And while Windows will be Windows, once you're in a game and you're playing it in your hand with nothing else attached, it's just a single device playing the game, it is such a surreal feeling to know that you're not tethered to anything, and yet you are playing a game that only a few years ago you would have to sit down at a chair or on a couch to play on a dedicated piece of hardware. And yes, I know I poked fun at the PlayStation Portal at the start, but I understand that that's an accessory. But when it comes to $700 to buy an ecosystem like the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation Portal, or $700 to grab a single device and take it on the go with you, for me personally, I'm going to spend that money on something that I can take with me and not have to rely on anything else. And for me, that's the ROG Ally. But either way, that's been it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. It's because of you all that I get to sit down and take notes on my gaming experience with a handheld console. You all make that possible, and I love you for it. So thank you all so much. Leave some comments down below letting me know what you all think about this, and maybe make some comparisons of your own, or just start some conversations. I love reading your comments. I try to read every single one if I can. So go ahead down there and definitely leave some comments. Like the video if you like the video, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I've been slowly working on a ton of stuff, and it's just taking forever to put out. And again, huge thanks to Mint Mobile for partnering with me for this video. If you want to check out that link down below, it's trymintmobile.com/GarrettCrespo if you want to do 3 months and get 3 months for free until January 1st. And aside from that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.